Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the grand opening of the Tehran Summit. My name is Zer0. I'm an artist and a researcher based in Tehran and one of the curators of the Tehran Summit. I'm going to read a short introduction of the summit and then pass the mic to Ghazal to introduce our first speaker, the amazing Zineb Sedira. One thing that I must mention is that please do not record this meeting because the Tehran Summit is the only entity that has the right to record it. This might create conflict, maybe in the future. We don't want that. Thank you. Hamayesh is a translation of the word summit in Persian language. It means coming together. Just like the 4 dots in the logo of the summit that are gathered and have created a new black and mysterious dot in the middle, we have gathered here tonight to create something important together. Hopefully as weird, mysterious, and as strange as that black dot. The Tehran Summit creates an alternative way of looking at the process of art making and rejects the monopolization of art by art institutions. The Tehran Summit is a bridge between the Iran's art community and artists around the world and brings together different contemporary discourses and methods of art making utilized by contemporary artists. The Tehran Summit emerges out of a need for independent and artist-run events initiated by independent art practitioners in a climate heavily affected by art institutions and commercial galleries. Thanks so much. Ghazal, you can have the mic.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so hello, I'm Ghazal Rateh in Iran and Ghazal in the rest of the world. Because even Zineb doesn't know Ghazal Rateh. Anyway, so I'm Ghazal, an artist based in Paris and Tehran. And it's a big pleasure to have Zineb Sedira, my great friend from London tonight, direct from London. Zineb was born in 1963 in Gennevilliers, outside Paris in France. She lives and works in London, Paris, and Algiers. She studied in the she got a BA in the St. Martin's School of Art in London and an MFA from Slade School of Art. And Zineb is right now representing France in the current Venice Biennale, which is the 59th. And I have to congratulate you, Zineb, for the special mention you won for your work.
Thank you.
And Zineb has had many solo exhibitions around the world. Just a selection, I could say, is Sharjah Art Foundation in 2018, Beirut Art Center in 2018, Jeu de Paume Museum in Paris 2019, IVAM in Spain in 2019, Bildmuseet in Sweden 2021, Smoca, Arizona, USA 2021. And Zineb has, besides this Venice Biennale, she has participated in many other biennials. She was already in the Venice Biennale twice, and she was in the ICP Triennial in New York in 2003, Thessaloniki Biennial in 2011, and Prospect New Orleans in 2016. And of course, Zineb has had many major museum shows around the world, such as Tate Britain, Centre Pompidou in Paris, Modern Museum Tokyo, Musée d'Art Moderne of Algiers, and the Brooklyn Museum, and Gwangju Museum in Korea, Macval in Paris, and there's a long list. So thank you, Zineb, and congratulations again for the special mention. And we are very proud that you represent France this year. And now it's to you. I turn off my microphone.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I must say it's quite nice to be at home doing meetings in front of the computer, as opposed to the last 3 mad months I had running around, working on adrenaline and living in Venice for a month and living in the French pavilion for a month. So it's quite nice to be back home with the family, friends, and to be able to connect to Tehran. I mean, you know, first time, I think, for me that I connect even via the internet with Tehran. So that's wonderful. So, I mean, it's like Ghazel was saying, you know, my practice been spanning for a good 20 years now. So there is so many artworks that I've made over the last 20 years, and it's very difficult for me to always have to select a small portion of the artworks. But with Ghazel, we agreed on some work that she felt could be interesting for the Tehran artistic community. I hope it is the case. So I am of Algerian background. My parents are Algerian. They immigrated in France in the early 60s, and I was born just after 62, and after Algeria won its independence from France. So I grew up on the estates, council estates in the suburbs of Paris, within a kind of very strong Maghrebi community, but not only. And then in '86, I came to live in London, and that's in London really that I started my artistic career, because that's when I studied art. But living in London also gave me this wonderful opportunity to be distanced from France and from Algeria and the situation between France and Algeria, and therefore produce work that I feel now, when I think about it, are probably much stronger because it has this distance. You know, I wasn't in Paris making work around, you know, post-colonial issues. I was actually in London, and people know that London's been, and the UK has been brilliant in terms of exploring and looking and teaching post-colonial studies and feminist studies. So there's those two kind of really important studies that I brought back into my work today. I mean, since 20 years and still today. So anyway, Ghazel asked me to concentrate on a piece of work which is, you know, truly a seminal work, in the sense that it was done in 2002 and is still highly in demand by various museums, and it's called Mother Tongue. So Mother and I, France, Daughter and I, England, Grandmother and Granddaughter, Algeria. So basically it's a piece talking about me as a mother, about my mother as a grandmother, and my daughter as a daughter. So my daughter born in the UK, speaking English, me born in France, speaking in French, or my mother tongue being French, and my mother born in Algeria, with her mother tongue being, you know, Algerian Arabic, we should say. So I devised a piece with 3 screens, where on each screen we are talking to each other. So on one, you've got my mother and I, in the middle, me and my daughter, and in the third screen, you've got my daughter and my mother. So granddaughter and grandmother attempting to talk to each other. So the first 2 screens, the conversation happened in both languages. So on the first screen, you've got Arabic and French, and we converse very naturally and very fluently, but in both mother tongues. The middle screen is the same. I speak to my daughter in French, she responds in English, and the conversation is again very natural and very fluent in that. But then when I arrive the third language with a granddaughter who speaks English and the grandmother who speaks Arabic, there is no communication possible. There is that try to speak to each other, and you could see there is a lot of silences, a lot of smiles on my mom's side, and on my daughter's side, a bit of a panic, because she doesn't understand what her grandmother is telling her. So this piece really, for me, it's about what I used to call a diasporic communication, or a new way of communicating that we have unconsciously recreating, because we lived in those 3 countries, which is Algeria, France, and England. And in the family, there is those 3 languages that are there very naturally. So I wanted to make a piece of work that kind of talked about having 3 languages in one family, which is a very common thing now. And then, yeah, it's a very successful piece, I guess, because it's very touching. It's talking about 3 generations of women, 3 languages, 3 countries. So it's very much about geopolitical issues also, but it's also about motherhood and being a woman. So at the time, I mean, I had become a mother, and of course, a lot of the issues that I was really interested in were, you know, the passing on the story of heritage, of cultural heritage, traditions, language, etc. And to see that in some ways, somehow it had failed. Happened when you see, you know, my mother and my daughter, where they can't communicate. So there is a gap there. And I became the mother, I became the kind of the link or the translator, the person that will make this communication between them two happen. So that piece started a whole body of work looking at oral history and gathering stories and telling them. So as an artist, I became aware that it will be perhaps quite interesting to tell stories via, of course, oral history, the voice, but in my case, through filming or photography. So my medium really predilections is video. I use a lot of video and film, a bit of photography too, but mainly video. So I started the whole body looking at oral history. So after this piece, there was another piece called, that I did in 2003. If I can move Mother, Father, and I. So for the first time, I include my father in my work. And I should say that I'm an artist who's well known to use the autobiographical or the personal with the political. So I tend to always talk about politics, but adding a personal story or personal testimony or experience. And at the time, it was very much using my family. So my mother, my daughter, and my father in this piece. So here I make my father and my mother talk about their life in Algeria when Algeria was colonized by France. My parents lived until at least the age of 1920 under French occupation. And then they moved to France to immigrate for economical reason. And that's why I was born. So here you've got an installation with free screen with my mother and my father talking about issues about living in Algeria under French occupation and what it meant. And then after coming to France, after they win the war against France and the occupation is gone from Algeria, they come back and live again under the enemy land, if you want. So I'm asking them to speak about that. So that then they talk about immigration, racism, humiliation, and my mom and my father are talking about those two issues or those issues in a very different manner. My father shows off, crack jokes, is quite, sure of himself in his way of telling the stories. My mom cries and cries a lot throughout the whole film, actually, and she talks about how difficult it is for her to raise Muslim children, Algerian children in a France which is very racist and in a France that doesn't want us. So it's very poignant in terms of, it was done in 2003, but I think of what happened after post 2011, it's kind of quite poignant what happened. Some of the things they're saying actually quite, actually we can see today, are quite predict really what happened much later. And then you've got me, a screen opposite them, listening to what they're saying. So I'm just listening. And I became a kind of quite good listener, because now when people tell me stories, and I think the story have some kind of political interest, I will then happily re-narrate the stories through video or video installation or photography, and this was the case. So it's a whole body of work where I'm starting to make my parents speak about the Algerian experience in France, because they never told also to their children, us growing up in France, what it meant to be living under French colonial rule, and what it meant after to come in France, and instead of enjoying this independence, they put themselves back into that position of a minority and in a position of vulnerability through racism and humiliation of the time. So it's a very kind of touching story, but again, very personal. And then there is a big leap, 2003, we jump into 2019. And this is because I can't really talk about all the work, but also I thought perhaps it's more interesting now to talk about where I am at now. The work is still very personal, it's still around using a lot of funds, but it's looking at the archives. So I'm doing a lot of research in different archives now. And for this piece, standing here wondering which way to go, which was a solo show I had at the Jeu de Paume in 2019. I did a very large installation, and Gazelle happened to be at the opening, so she saw the work. I don't know if many of you did, but anyway, it was a complex piece of work in 4 scenes, and it was looking at the Pan-African Festival of Algiers in 1969. So in 1969, the state of Algeria decided to throw a big party, a big festival called the Pan-African Festival. And as much as the title said Pan-African, it was not just about African country. It was open up to all the countries who were still colonized or just about to decolonize themselves. So in Algeria in 69, that summer, you could see people from Vietnam, Palestine, the Black Panthers from the civil rights movement in America were there, the Cubans were there, of course, a lot of African countries, but basically it was a kind of a meeting point where all those kind of liberation movement were meeting up, but also where Algeria was inviting singers, actors, filmmakers. There was a lot of play, exhibitions, art exhibition. There was like a big things where, you know, you saw, I mean, really culture exploding there. But because the Algerian state argument at the time, and it wasn't just the Algerian state argument, it was a very much a 1960s era, looking at how culture and arts somehow can be a tool to fight a war, or can be a tool to resist, or can be a gun to resist colonization or any war. It was a very strong anti-imperialist project. And in some level also anti-capitalist, but that's another story. So anyway, so I decided to look into this period. I went to Algeria, did a lot of research, and I found this amazing film by an American filmmaker who lives in Paris and has lived in Paris for a long time. It's William Klein. I'm sure you know him for his photography and some of the film he's done, but he did a wonderful film called the Pan-African Festival of Algiers. So I did research on the film, and then I decided to devise my installation as a Jeu de Paume in 4 scenes. So the first scene, mise en scène, which is the reproduction of 1960 cinema, where I found a lot of bits of film at the Cinematheque of Algiers. I found a lot of bits of films who were damaged and thrown away. I picked them up, took them from the bin, picked them up and stitched them all together and made my own film out of this film. I mean, it's important to know that those bits of films were all coming from bits of militant film from that era, from the 60s. Algeria was financing a lot of film by Algerian filmmakers, but not only, and the William Klein film is an example of that. So anyone who was making films who were anti-colonial, Algeria would be happy to produce or finance them. So there was some really strong co-production with Algeria and local Algerian filmmaker, but also non-Algerian. You know, I'm thinking of the Lebanese filmmakers like Justin Saab, I'm thinking of Youssef Chahine for the Egyptian, and many, and also a lot of European filmmakers. But that connects with my Venice Pavilion project, so I'll tell you more about that. So anyway, I stitched all those bits of film together, and I recreate my own narrative and story through those bits of decayed film. So it's looking also at decaying, restoration, memory, what happened when memory is lost, what happened when memory is not archived. And I know in Algeria, we have a big problem about archiving history. We archive the official stories and official history, but we don't want to archive all the other stories who are still part of Algeria. So depending on the government that comes into place, an archive is perhaps more looked after than the other ones. So it's looking at all those issues of archiving, restoring, preserving, and sharing. Yeah. So the second scene, it's called For a Brief Moment, the World Was on Fire. And it's a photo montage. I think there was 11 photo montage at the Jeu de Paume, where I use all the elements of the archival materials that I find. And I'm going to show you some close-up after. So I made some collages with archival material. And for me, it was important to kind of get the archive out of the archive institution, the heaviness of the official archives, because they're quite heavy and you have to wear gloves when you go and visit them, and you have to be, you know, everything is like there is a whole kind of ritual around looking at the archive. I was lucky to access this archive in Algeria, which is very rare. Took a lot of photograph with my iPhone, and decided to transgress this idea of the archive as something precious by making my own collages, and also by sharing, because this archive in Algeria, as I said, very, very few people can access it in Algeria, let alone people from abroad that want to explore that Pan-African festival, for example. So I decided my only way to share and to show the information, and that's what I call sharing of knowledge, is by making collages where people could read some of the text and see some of the images. I also added a little shelf, and on each of those little shelves, I also put some objects. So so you've got a flat image, which is a collage, and then next to that on the shelf you've got, you know, vinyls, you've got stones, you've got object, often object that dates from the 60s and who has a militant anti-colonial connection. And I did, because I'm somebody who collects a lot and goes to a lot of flea market, I collect a lot of objects from the 60s. I'm somebody who loves the 60s. And you can see, you know, behind me a poster, which is an old-fashioned one too. I decided to include some of these elements, to go to the flea markets, buy them, and put them there, and to use those elements that I was buying in flea market as also archival material, archival objects. So the other piece that which is scene 4, we have come back in the installation of vinyl. So I bought, again, I had to spend a lot of time researching, but I bought all the vinyls that came out during that 1969 Pan-African Festival, and all the music or all the singers or singer that came to Algeria at the time. There was a lot of African-American singer that came, some super well-known like Nina Simone or Archie Shepp or people like that, and some less known, but I managed to find all the vinyls. And here you have a close-up of some of the vinyls. And so, but all those singers, the reasons they were invited to Algeria, it's not only because they were good singers and good musicians, it's because a lot of their activities was a kind of political activities. They were all coming out from the civil rights movement. They were all doing what we call some protest music. And then I kind of managed to gather a lot of the vinyls and to show them as part of the installation, mixing it with the photo montage. So it's looking again at the music, art, as a way of protesting somehow. And then the scene-free way of life, it's my living room. I decided to literally, the living room I am now in, I literally decided to displace it and to put it at the Jeu de Paume. So I took exactly the size of my living room here in London and created a room playing with this idea of stage design and the diorama and theater and film set. So recreated with a wallpaper. I took photographs of my walls with my photographs and paintings and things like that. And so it's a photographic installation, you can say. So recreated a room, and in that room, I displaced all my 1960s furniture and put it in my room. Because a lot of the furniture and a lot of objects I had gathered over the years, they had somehow some connection with Africa, the Middle East, or that kind of colonial histories that I was interested in. You can see also my shelf with all the books. They're all books, you know, that talks about, you know, all those kind of colonial stories. And a great, I mean, like I have in my living room today, a TV where I watch my film. Here I put an interview by Nadir Alagoun, who was at the time the director of the MAMA, which is a Museum of Modern Art in Algiers, who talked about her experience because she was 18 when the Pan-African Festival happened in Algiers. So she talks about what it meant for her, a woman of 19 years old, just after Algeria winning its independence, what it meant to be part of such a brilliant and vibrant moment in time, anti-colonial moment in time in Algeria. What can I say about that? So it's talking obviously a lot of cinema, you see a lot of film posters on my walls. And then I decided for this project to invite some artists to show some work. Here I invited William Klein. I didn't show the film, but I invited William Klein to lend me one of the posters of one of his, out of the film, you know, when it came out in Paris. And then some photographs, and you see it better, some photographs, some small photographs, but the original print of photographers in Algeria in 1969 taking photographs of the performances that happened, because there was a lot of, as I said, dance and theater happening also. And my friend Jason Odi, who did a whole series of photographs in Algeria of Oscar Niemeyer, the well-known Brazilian architect, he did two large buildings in Algeria in 1969, and that was also part of the ethos of Algeria at the time, to invite, you know, a Brazilian political architect to build something in Algeria. So it's all part of the same kind of ideas. I think perhaps I should move on to the next part, which is a piece I just did in Venice, and it connects quite strongly with a piece before. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because this piece here, Dreams Have No Titles, is totally linked into the cinema. Because as I was doing research in Algeria about the Pan-African Festival, I discovered that Algeria had, first of all, a cinematheque in 1965. The first in Africa was in Algeria in 1965. That cinematheque was built on the model of the French cinematheque, but nevertheless, the importance and the focus of that cinematheque in Algeria, in Algiers, was militant cinema and anti-colonial cinema. So all the films they were showing mainly, and all the filmmakers they were inviting to come and talk about their films, were filmmakers who wanted to talk about anti-colonialization, yeah? So anyway, so I realized that Algeria not only had created this cinematheque that still exists today, but also produced and filmed and spent and co-produced some films, as I was saying earlier, and some of the big names we can think of Z by Costa Gavras, we can think of L'étranger by Visconti, we can think of The Battle of Algiers by Pontecorvo, we can think of Les Mains Libres by Ennio Lorenzini. Now I'm just citing only the European names because this project is really about that. And then, for example, also another well-known one is Le Bal by Ettore Scola. So my project for Venice, of course, had to be between Algeria, France, because I'm French and Algerian, and between Italy because of Venice and because the Mostra of Venice is in Venice, and I was showing my piece in Venice. I wanted also to thank the Festival of Venice, Film Festival of Venice, because in 1966, it gave to the Battle of Algiers a Golden Lion as a political act to show that the film industry, the Italian film industry anyway, was for anti-colonization or was going towards those political ideas. And that created a big scandal and a big problem between France and Italy for a few years after, because France didn't accept that and they left very angry at the time, the ceremony. So I thought it'd be quite a nice start to start from that moment of 1966 and the Golden Lion in Venice. So I decided to concentrate my research into those three countries, those triangle, which is France, Algeria, and Italy. And I went to Italy, researched very thoroughly all the archival material in the film archives I've got. I went to France, did the same. And Algeria, I had done so much of it. And anyway, it was COVID. I couldn't travel to Algeria, but it was okay because I had so much material that I kind of decided to construct my project around the militant cinema of the 60s, 70s between France and Algeria, between Italy and Algeria, and sometimes the three of them together. So I recreated the 1960s cinema, which is the cinema of my childhood in Gennevilliers. My dad used to take me to the cinema when I was from the age of 5 until the age of 12. And it was a small cinema, quite popular. And I recreated, so in the French pavilion in Venice, exactly the size of that cinema of my childhood. And we obviously put some 1950s, 60s chair and created that kind of an art house type of and I made a film shot in 16mm with some digital images. And the film is very important because this is a hub or the main piece in the whole pavilion. So what I decided to do from the outset with the French pavilion is to change it into a film studio. So we went to shoot my film there. We created all the set design, the decors, the accessories, the costumes, everything was in the French pavilion. So the French pavilion really became like a film studio. The lamps, cameras, everything was there. And as I said, the set design. And the cinema is somehow a set design also, but you can come and sit and watch the film. So the film was shot in the pavilion with a set design, and then we left the set design there. I decided to not pack them up and throw them away. I decided that what the audience will see in Venice as artwork will be the film, but will be also all the set design that will be left exactly where they were when we shot the film. And I'll show you later on. But going back to the film, I made a film using a lot of remakes. So I went to look at all those films co-produced with Algeria and Italy and France. And I took some bits of the film, scenes that I thought was interesting, and decided to remake them. So it's really the base of a basic remake. But I decided to play in some of them. This one you see now, it's me playing the role of that actress in a film called Le Bal, Ballando Ballando by Ettore Scola. And you've got my son, you have a man there behind the bar, and it's my son, Ali, that also invited. So for me, it was important to invite a lot of my friends to be part of the film, because I wanted to talk, and I forgot to say, because it's very important, it's this co-production that happened between Algeria and Italy and France were born because of solidarity moments and solidarity movement, where the Italian and the French wanted to work with Algeria because they wanted to make films that were anti-colonial. So there was a moment where there was a friendship, a bond that happened politically, but artistically and intellectually also. So those filmmakers wanted to work with Algeria because Algeria had the money at the time and also just decolonized itself. So it was an example, successful example of decolonization. And therefore, for those Italian and French filmmakers, it was important to work with Algeria. So I, as I said, find those films, took some elements of it, and here I decided to play in one of the scenes. So friendship is big and very important in the whole project. Hence why my son is in it. Once all my friends are in it, the curators that curated the pavilions are in my film. They all have a very set roles. And then I've got extras who are also my friends. So it's really a project about friendship and family and my artistic community. It's very important to say that. Here you've got like the set design. What you see now, it's a set design. It looks like a real bar, but it's not. It is literally a set like you see in films. And you have, Gazelle probably recognize him, Faisal, who's an artist from Paris of Algerian origin, who's playing a role as a dancer with me. We dance an amazing tango dance together. And then you've got my son, as I said, there in the back. So this is during the film shoot. Here you have the Battle of Algiers. It's one scene of the Battle of Algiers. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you've seen it, is a scene when the lady bleach her hair to become as European as possible because she's about to go and put a bomb in a cafe. Yeah. So in the film, you see the curator, Yasmine Arigad, the curator of the French pavilion, playing that scene. Yeah, she plays the scene, but here is a decor and we left it as we used it at the time with the camera and the lighting and everything. Here you have the dressing room as it was during the shoot. And we left it also there as a prop, as an art piece for people to. So when people will come in the pavilion, they'll be able to sit, to look at the clothes, to take themselves photograph, to participate somehow in my own film and make their own film. Here you've got L'Étranger de Visconti. So it's from the book, the Camus book, yeah. So again, you've got my friend Edith who plays an amazing scene about the death of a lady, and she plays a scene, but here is the decor as we left it. Here, my living room, again, from the Jeu de Paume, here we find it again in Venice, but instead of having Nadira Lagoon talking about the Pan-African Festival, here I've got Sonia Boyce and Gillian Tawadros talking about, again, political alliances and friendship in Brixton, because I live in Brixton in London, in Brixton in the 60s and 90s. I must also say that Sonia Boyce is representing the UK at the moment. And the French pavilion and the British pavilion are like 40 meters away from each other. So we two good friends representing a country the same year. Sonia was also my neighbors for 10 years here in Brixton, in my street. So I thought it was quite an interesting gesture to do, to include her in my project as a bridge, to make a bridge with the UK somehow. Here you've got a scene from F for Fake by Orson Welles. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a very interesting film that talks about trickery and cinema and what is fake. And we recreated a scene, and Till Felleraf, who's another curator of the French pavilion, is playing Orson Welles, literally, in that scene. And you see, at Compal, I bought all those and was given all those film canisters. And we have Viola, an editing table, was from the 60s given to us. So there was a lot of kind of sources and buying and researching of all the material also. Here you got the green screen, which we used a lot. So we literally shot a lot of scenes in front of a green screen. So I could include myself in the film inside other more well-known film by filmmakers. But here we decided to put the maquette of my living room, because I recreated a small maquette of my living room, playing on this idea of mise en abîme. And in the film, you see the living room, the maquette in the living room. So it's an interesting kind of mise en abîme playing. And then, you know, some references from film, the suitcases, the typewriter. You often find similar kind of object in those militant films. You know, the typewriter is one, the suitcase is another one. So the radio is another one. So I decided to include all those elements also in my film. I think this is it for me, and I think we're right on time. So what else can I say otherwise? Oh yeah, as part of this project also, I decided to look for a film that was financed by Casbah Film, which is an Algerian production company, the same that produced also the Battle of Algiers. They produced a film in 1964 called Les Mains Libres, and it got lost. It was shown in Algeria in 65. I think it was shown in Cannes also in 65, but after it was lost. For almost 60 years, it disappeared. And during COVID, I looked everywhere for it, and I find it. And I find it in a very small archive in Rome called AA Mod. And I asked the Cinematheque of Bologna, because they're the one who do the restoration jobs. I asked them if they will restore the film as part of my project. So it's outside what I call outside the walls of the pavilion, but it's still part of my Venice project. So we're restoring an amazing 1964 film by an Italian filmmaker, but it's an Algerian film because it's about Algeria, and it's gonna premiere in Bologna this June, end of June. So I'm very happy that I've managed to get out a film from who could have got lost and never seen again, really. And now I'm able to tour it and to show it to quite a few places. And I hope Gazelle will be able to show it in Tehran at one point.
Thank you, Zineb.
Thank you so much, Zineb.
First, I have to say something. I told you this a long time ago when we did the show 2003 that you curated. Remember the veil? The Battle of Algiers was shown every year in Iranian public television when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And the scene that really, really is still in my mind is when she cuts her hair. They cut their hair.
Yeah, this is exactly that
scene. I don't remember the bleaching, but I remember when they cut their hair.
Yeah, she cuts her hair, and then she has short hair, and she bleaches it to become blonde, and then she goes out in the street to play the bomb. Yeah.
Yes. And one thing I wanted to say, I mean, it's actually, I mean, we know that for you, art is a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And that you know, you in those early films that you showed that I really adore, you know, you broke all these taboos. Mm-hmm. As a French Algerian. Mm-hmm. Nobody did it before you. One thing is that, and second thing is that now that you say that, you know, you were narrating the family stories, which is a small story which was not documented actually, and is sort of, you're archiving the unwritten history. Yeah. And now you're archiving the unwritten history of others, which is really interesting. In the beginning, it was you and your family. Now it's gone to the others.
Well, it's still about Algeria and the history of Algeria. I mean, those films I'm looking at, they're all Algerian films, you know.
Yeah, I'm talking about the other Algerians, I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's true. I mean, but it's still, even though it's about others, it still always starts from my own story. And for example, the Venice Biennale project started because of my father taking me to the cinema, you know, and hence why it was important to bring the cinema of my childhood into the French pavilion. Also to bring Gennevilliers, you know, which is a suburb that nobody knows about, although the city of Gennevilliers is still a communist town after, you know, 60, 70 years. It's an interesting place. For me, it was an interesting place to start the project, and to realize that it comes again from my dad or my mom, or it's always, you know, there is always the starting of the family. So it's really the small story inside, or connecting to the big story. And for me,
it's also your role as an artist, which is very important, because you're the witness and you are the voice of the others.
Yeah, for me, transmission is very important. So yes. I think I'm extremely lucky to be able to make art and to be able to share my experience and my findings, because when I go to archives and I'm only the one able to access them, I'm so happy then to share and to be able to kind of tell what I find, you know. And for example, the story of Algerian cinema, very, very few people know about it. And when I tell people that, they're really shocked when they realize that, you know, the Algerian state financed Z by Costa Gavras. They're like, no, this is not possible. Yes, it is possible. And it won an Oscar in 1969, actually. Yeah. So, you know, it's kind of, because Algeria doesn't talk about it. So if Algeria doesn't talk about it, I'm going to talk about it, you know. So yes, I don't know if you have some questions from.
I think Erfan probably has some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation, Zineb. So one thing that I notice in your works is that you're not, in a sense, commodifying your identity. Like, I'm not saying that because you're our guest and I'm just being nice. It's because that's not what you do. That's the way you approach your subject matter, is that you are the case study of yourself. Your identity.
Yeah.
You are at the same time the subject and the object, and the work is the collapse of the between the subject and the object, and that makes it very interesting, because you in a sense look at yourself as sort of a symptom of a pre-existing situation, of a structure, of a system, of an apparatus, of something that is outside that's created you. And you're trying to talk about it in you. See, I cannot say that to like to describe all the artists, but you're at the same time a researcher and a poet. Like your work has this poetic quality to it, like your mother tongue. And at the same time, you're saying you're trying to grasp something outside that withdraws, in fact.
Yeah. Perhaps when you talk about poetry, it's because it's the personal that kind of gives it this kind of layer, because it's about me, and because I don't take often myself so seriously, especially the film Venice. There is so much moments where I'm really taking, you know, really laughing at myself. You know, there is so much kind of self-derision in it when I play, you know, the acting, when I act and things like that. You know, I mean, it's a pity I can't show you the film, because the film is kind of quite funny, but also very dramatic. You know, it's got this kind of both elements.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anyway.
Yeah, because your language is not didactic. You're not like, sit down, I'm gonna teach you something. And also at the same time, this is not decorative as well. Like, look at this beautiful flower that only exists in Algeria. Let's buy this. This is not the case for you, right? And one thing that I saw in one of your most recent video interviews is that you describe yourself as the keeper of a memory. And that caught up in my mind. And I was like, well, my question is, whose memory is it?
This is everyone's memory. I mean, that's why I start from the personal and then the collective I. You know, my memory belongs to everyone, because I'm not the only one who have experienced those things. You know, and I always say I'm a product of that colonization. You know, I was born in France in '63 because my parents left Algeria because they were so poor. You know, during colonization, that they had to come in France to make money. And then I became this product where then I grew up, as a French Algerian with all the problems of it or all the good things about it, because it's not just problematic. I mean, obviously I gained quite a lot of good things about it too. But sorry, I've lost my thread.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, because I think your project that starts from something personal and becomes something universal. And that's why, like, for example, I can, in a sense, like, relate to your mother tongue piece, because my mom is Kurdish, like, she talks Kurdish, and sometimes I don't understand, like, there is this loss in translation, even for me, a Middle Eastern guy, right? And that's how,
that's why that's why it's so universal, because even this first piece, Mother Tongue, which is like, very common in the diaspora. I mean, I think somehow like Erfan lives it inside of Iran with Iranian parents, but from two different parts of Iran. But also, like, I see that it's something you identify with, because, for example, in my family, it's like that too, with my brother's children, who sort of lost Persian and lost French, and they speak English now, where they're half French, half Swiss, and half Iranian. So I think it's something that has become very, very common, and that's why it's so universal. It's personal because it's you, but it's universal.
Yeah, but exactly. But for me, from the beginning, I knew. I mean, people ask me sometimes if I'm a political artist, and I say, well, I am, but I'm not a political artist as an activist. A political artist, which there are some artists, and we're doing very well, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think we need them, but it's not me. I always felt, and that's the way art speaks to me also. When it's done, if politics is spoken via the personal voice, I can engage with it. I can hear it. When it's pushed into my face, telling me what I should be thinking, or if it's didactic or things like that, I tend to kind of withdraw a bit and think, oh, I don't know if I want to think that. But if I just let the problematic there, and anyone can take what I want from it or not, for me it's a different matter. And I think that's probably why a lot of people find there is poetry. It's more that it's more subtle and more accessible. Accessible, perhaps, is a word. Yeah.
Absolutely. If anybody else has
direct, simple, and sort of from your guts. It's true. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not ashamed to talk about things. I mean, especially the film now in Venice. I didn't realize, but it's a film about my life, and I'm talking about things because I do a voiceover, and I'm talking about extremely personal things that I would have never said 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But now I said them because I think it's for everyone. I'm not ashamed having lost a brother or a sister, or we need to talk about those things. We need to talk about them because they are rooted in some political kind of moment also. I mean, I wouldn't talk about them if it was, or perhaps I would if it died from health reason. But because they were connected strongly to a certain time in France where racism was like very, very strong, I felt I should talk about it, especially because I'm representing France, especially because I'm in the French pavilion, and especially because I decided to break this idea of the notion of the French nation. What does it mean? I'm talking about all those different countries, all the people participating in the film and the project are coming from all over the world. I mean, it wasn't at all a French pavilion. It was like a multi-complex international kind of pavilion. And for me, it was important to break this idea of what France is,
But you show actually what France is, because France is this mixture.
Yeah, of course.
And so I think it's very important that they chose you actually as a Algerian. It was the first time, and first of all, we never had many women, and first time that France chose someone who's an immigrant, which is fantastic. And then, what you said about your sister, remember in 2003, it was, remember, in Barcelona?
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned it and you were very upset. So I think it's also this.
I was upset because it was used as a commodity, and I didn't like that. It was used.
And without your permission.
Yeah, and to add a bit of spice to my work, which I thought was shocking. But when I'm ready for it and I'm using it not to add spice, just because I want to talk about a very particular time in France, which are the 70s really, then yeah, so it made sense to talk about it, you know.
Mhm. Efron, you want to see if the audience has questions?
I just wrote it down in the comment section. If anybody has any questions, they can raise hand by clicking on raising hand. And like, or if they don't feel comfortable talking, they can write it down in the comment section.
Yeah.
And then
it'd be nice to have one or two questions from
absolutely, absolutely.
wider.
But I think there are so many things that we can talk about, especially about the piece that you showed in Venice Biennale, because these are like the traces of a fiction, like the documentation of a fiction. That's very interesting. That's a, you know.
Armand and Katy are there. I hope they ask their questions.
Yeah, maybe. What fascinating? Oh, hey Armand, how's it going?
Hi, perhaps I could just make a comment rather than a question. Zineb, thank you very much, first of all, for that wonderful talk. And it is a privilege to hear you talk about your work here, and well done to Gazelle and Erfan for this. This is a great start to this summit. I think, Zineb, you as a global contemporary artist, it's easy to have labels attached to you as a French Algerian, as a British artist or a British resident artist or something. But all of these, I think, mix up, and your experience leads to your artistic output. And I think that what comes out as your work is that you know, it comes without trying to you, but there is a danger for people to try to become something or try to label something. And I think what is so natural and great is to see this, your body of work, that you know, we see after, you know, 20 years of work, we see that it all makes sense. We see that there is a coherence there, and the work sits very well within that global contemporary without the need for putting any particular or specific label to it. Thank you all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll agree with you. Unfortunately, there is always the need for art professional to somehow label you, whatever we do, you know. So of course I'd like to be just an artist, but I'm always a female artist or female Algerian artist or British artist or French artist or whatever. So and we try and we try to always move away from that. But somehow, if you're an artist dealing with issues like mine, people feel they need to say where you come from, and this is problematic, yes, but at the same time, I haven't found any kind of solution or way out from it. The way out will be probably to go and make flowers about my park opposite where I live in Brixton. And then suddenly people will not talk about Algeria anymore. No, France, actually, they'll be talking perhaps about the British garden opposite the house. But that's not the type of work I do. And as long as you do work that is can somehow politically engage and about geopolitics, people will want to put something, a territory to attach to your names, and that's. But I think initially, you know, like perhaps 20 years ago, this was much stronger than now. Now, perhaps because of the career, because I proved myself as an artist. I don't know. I have less this problem. I'm less invited to show geographical shows. I'm more invited as an artist, you know. And that, I must say, it feels good. That doesn't mean I'll say no to a geographical show if tomorrow I was invited to, if the concept, the content of the exhibition is interesting, I will still do it. But it is a real problem. I don't know. I don't have any answer to that really. I just, you know. But it's a very valid point to make because it is a problem. Yeah.
Shima, do you have a question? I thought you raised hand.
Somebody raised her hand.
I think that was Shima, but I'm not sure if that was a mistake or not.
Hello.
Hey,
I'm
hey,
sorry.
Shima, how's it going?
Do you have my voice?
Yeah. You can hear.
Oh, just it was just a mistake. I want to just thank Zainab for this very informative talk, and yeah, I wanted to apologize to actually for coming late, but I hope that we will have the access to the recording, and yeah, just some appreciation, just that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
okay, I was wondering if. Okay, Sami says there is Mahdiar asks, thank you, Zineb. Do you think is there any possibility for your record of time by the objects to be also in future being some kind of speculative sets and arts about how colonialism expand and change itself through the time?
Oof. Can somebody translate to simplify that?
Well, can he come online and ask it simply,
Can
Matthew?
you ask it yourself?
Directly?
Mahdiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm gonna make it simple, it's gonna be I see these objects and I put it to another time. What I see and what I feel by these objects and these sets, and what happens. I think just an idea pop in my head. How is there any way to we can think how can future be just like these, but in future? I mean, some kind of I don't know, maybe with some AR or VR, we can distort this object by some technologies or something else. I don't know, but there's just this question in my head that how can our future be rooted by these pasts, by this object that make this past time.
Like the archives, for example. I mean, for me anyway, I think it's very, very important to explore and appropriate one, you know, the archive of the past by, you know, looking at it in order to better, you know, move forward. So for me, obviously, when I'm talking about this kind of 1960s moment of alliances, political alliances within the art world or the cinema world, that was a moment. It's less so now. It's not there anymore. But somehow I'm thinking it's only by understanding exactly what happened and where it failed somehow that we can perhaps recreate similar situation that might be more successful. I don't know if I answered your question, but for me then, all objects, documents, objects, you know, past films, they're all interesting medium to explore because it's part of our history and they're part of our memory, and therefore we need to look at them, to not repeat or to repeat the same thing if we think it was successful, or definitively not repeat. Most of the time we repeat the same mistake we've made. So, you know, perhaps we need to look at it thoroughly. And I think as artists, we're lucky because we can actually, we're not art historian or historian. When we go to an archive place, we don't have to use the archive in the same way than them. You know, we can actually question it. We can say it's got no value, or it has value, or we can cut it. We can make an object out of it. We can do so many things. And but the beauty about us artists is that we can really push the archive and give it life, because the archive tends to be, you know, quite dead material usually, you know, but we can actually reappropriate it and give it some life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zineb. Sami has a question. He says, I was wondering if there was any propaganda pro-France found in your research in Algeria back in time. Propaganda.
Well, the archive I was looking at was the Cinematheque of Algiers archive, for example. It was set in 1965. So all the stuff there are post 65. So there was no pro-France. It was the opposite. Anything before 62, of course, was different, but I didn't look at this archive. So, you know, for that, there is plenty in France, for example, and there is tons of material in that. But no, in the research I've done, there wasn't. I must say that Italy, for me, was a very interesting country because to realize that the filmmakers in the 60s, 70s were so politically engaged and so anti-colonial, much more than France, much more than many other European countries. Italy was really, and probably came from the fact that of the new realism cinema, and the new realism cinema comes from the fascism period they went through. But the cinema was so kind of politically engaged. It was just so much material there. It was so rich and so, I mean, I was bluffed by what I saw. And I think I will still carry on doing some research in Italy because of that.
But they weren't big, I don't know what, I mean, they weren't like the French who colonized half of the world, or the English who colonized half of the world.
Well, they still had Libya, and Yemen, and they still had 2 countries like that. But yeah, funny enough, they never made films about Libya, but they made film about Algeria, and perhaps that was their way of talking about their own colonizations by using other example. Yeah, but you're right, it's nothing like France or England. No, yeah.
England.
I have another question. So I know that you started art as a photographer. And, that's still one of your favorite mediums, I guess.
I started really my art with video installation, and video or film, because now even, you know, I've been filming on 16mm film and 35mm analog film for quite some time now. I adore film. I adore it, especially in an installation format, when I can, you know, play with many screens and all that. But for me, it's my favorite format because it's, especially because a lot of my video, it's about interviewing people, talking, you know, and that's going back to your question earlier about gardien d'image or image keeper. It's, you know, for me to do interviews, having people record them and then show the films. The medium of film is just perfect for that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to figure out, like, yeah, you're working with photography, cinema, which has this firm ground in reality, as opposed to other mediums like other like subject-oriented mediums like painting, which is pure reflection of, or like a self-expression. I'm just wondering, how do you see this this like selecting photography as opposed to painting has played a role of you becoming Zineb Sedira, the person that we are?
I guess photography is much easier than painting, I guess. So, you know, when you do video photography, it's much easier. It's easier to take photographs than to paint, I think, but perhaps I'm wrong. But no, I mean, when you do so much video and it's so much image based, and we all know that video or analog filming is like photograph, you know, like many frames of photograph within a certain time frame, and that makes it moving. I mean, it's kind of quite natural to photograph. But for me, photography was also because it was an easier medium. You could have a camera, and go to Algeria quite easily and film. You know, as soon as you have a film camera or video camera, it becomes, in some countries, it becomes much more difficult and tedious because there is a paranoia that you might film things or whatever. So photography somehow were always a very easy medium and apparatus to have, and enjoy it, especially analog. I never do digital photography, so when I can do analog, it's a pleasure. But I haven't done it for a long time now, so I'm missing it. But film is anyway for. I mean, or if I do it, it's like when I did my living room, so it's photographs of the wall, you know, so it becomes a big installation. It's not photographs framed on the wall like I used to do. My use of photography is totally changed. It's much more looking at trompe-l'œil and, you know, and this idea of fiction and reality and, you know, trickery, the trickery of the eyes and, you know, and the trickery you find also in film, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because you're dealing with documentations. You could have made the whole room, like draw the whole room, but you didn't.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work.
It's not a medium. It's not real.
Yeah, it's not real. It's fiction.
Yeah, it's fiction.
It appears to be real, but it's fiction. It's the idea of the trompe-l'œil. But the trompe-l'œil used to be paintings, yeah, you know. So people used to paint them. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, try to find a painter who has a skill of painting so kind of realistically. It's so expensive. Photography is not so expensive, really.
And also, it's I think from the beginning when you did photography, it's also because it's more universal in a way, because everybody has a culture of images and television, whatever. We're used to photography.
Yeah,
we're used to images.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Any other questions?
Take a picture.
Yazel, other questions?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, Armand.
Other question. I actually have a question here to ask. Zineb, during the lockdown and the restrictions of lockdown, were you able to do something that you couldn't have done? Did it affect your output or your thinking?
My thinking, no. My travels, yeah, because I had to wait till I was able to travel to go to the archives. Algeria, I wasn't able to go at all because they wouldn't let anyone come in. As soon as there was few opening periods like that, I went to Italy each time I could, very briefly, and come back. So there was a lot of kind of canceling last minute because a new law, new set of rules were happening. It was a nightmare. But what it did, it gave me a lot of space to read, to research online, because I have quite a lot of stuff online. And then the thing I did from the outset, when the COVID happened, I hired 3 consultants in cinema, one in Algeria, one in Italy, and one in France. The 3 of them were specialists of the cinema I was looking into. And while I was in my living room, sitting, they were feeding me with their own information. Sometimes their archive was open where they were working. So they would go and do the research for me, sending to me. We'll have Zoom meeting. So I did try to do as much as I could. But yes, it did delay things. But at the end, I still managed to do, I think, a very strong project. So I'm thinking perhaps it did help me more than anything, you know, perhaps I don't realize yet. Because I had really the time and space to think and to watch film. I watched so many films, which we all did during that period, but my films were mainly around the subject that I was interested in. Yeah, so it was brilliant.
Right. Thank you.
No more. There's a question.
Yeah, from Pego. She says, I wanted to ask, are you also concerned with archiving the objects or images related to the contemporary situation of Algeria and what it's being experienced through these recent years?
Well, the archiving of images or objects in Algeria at the moment, it's inexistent, really. I mean, they're trying to do a bit more with film because they realize that the history of the Algerian cinema is quite strong. So now they're trying to preserve and restore. They even restored a few films recently, but they don't have the means to restore films. They have to send it in France or in Italy to get it restored. So they can't do it locally. So this is a problem because this is very expensive. But today the cinema industry in Algeria is getting worse and worse. It's gone from being, you know, a golden age almost in the 60s to now being such a struggle. And that came from the last 3-4 years political situation with Iraq, the president of the time being, you know, ejected, and then having this new president. And with a new president came a form of paranoia that makes him not authorize anyone to film in Algeria. So all those Algerian filmmakers now who are seeking authorization to film somewhere, whatever, they don't get authorization anymore. So that makes that even the Algerian cinema by Algerian filmmakers is not happening at the moment. And I hope it's gonna change, but at the moment it's terrible. So it's an awful, awful situation in Algeria. And that's why my project is even more important, because I'm talking about a, you know, golden age of Algerian cinema in the 60s, 70s, up to the end of the 80s. And it went downhill with the Black Decade, the rise of, you know, the Islamists in Algeria, you know, the story, and blah, blah, blah. So that's when it started going downhill, and it's still, and we're still, you know, suffering very much from it. So I'm very happy to recall that at one point, cinema was important to the people, and it is still now, but it's not allowed by the state anymore in the way it used to be. Yeah, so it's very sad.
Katie Shahande, given the fact that the images are an important aide memoir in the in the act of recollecting the past and the identities that occupy it, do you see your use of archive as a way of asserting your Algerian identity? In this sense, also, how important to you is the other in the definition of the self, and provide a benchmark in your construction of identity?
Is it a way of asserting my Algerian identity? I don't know. I hope not. I don't know. It is definitively about talking about things that are invisible. So it's about, for me, it was always about talking about minorities, and I'm part of that minority. And I can talk, the best way I can talk about the minorities, it's by talking about myself. I'm not gonna talk about, you know, the Iranian minority in Paris or the Iranian minority in London. I don't know it. I could, of course I could, but I wouldn't do it as well as perhaps an Iranian person would do. So yes, of course, it's about you know, finding flaws in the Algerian culture somehow, and trying to kind of give it back a place that it deserves. But also, it's not just about, you know, talking about positive things. It's also talking about what's going on, you know, even if it's negative or critical, you know. It's also about, because when you talk about something so positive like the golden age of the Algerian cinema of the 60s, of course, you can only compare it to today. And we all know, you all know, you've seen there isn't so many films that come out from Algeria. So you realize that there is, you know, so it begs the question when you look at my project, that you automatically wonder what's happening today. And therefore it throws you back to what's happening today. So I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's about asserting my Algerian identity, but it's definitively about, because I'm talking also about my French identity. I mean, it's quite interesting that people concentrate on the Algerian one. I'm talking also in the project of Venice about what all the French filmmakers who worked with Algeria also. And there is a list of that. And I'm in the French pavilion. So, you know, so I'm talking about the French, and I'm talking about the British. In the pavilion of Venice, I'm talking a lot about Brixton and my home today, and what it means to be living and having studied in the UK. I talk a lot about my British identity too. Yeah.
Sorry, if I can just continue on
Yeah.
that. I didn't mean just asserting the Algerian identity in the sense that, obviously, as you mentioned, that you grew up in France, which we know is somewhat Islamophobic as a country, and sort of, so there is these elements of obviously as hybridity and sort of as an Iranian by origin who lives in the UK, I think it's not as extreme obviously as France is, but you know, there is this hybridity where, for me at least, where you sort of embrace both cultures, you embrace, but at the same time you're also critical. You can't blindly accept either. So there is no, in a sense that perhaps, for example, it would have been for my parents who were sort of Iranian, or my children who I feel are more British than, whereas we of that generation was sort of this caught in this bit of a limbo, this sort of no man's land and every man's land in a way, which I think comes across in your work, and comes across, I think, in diasporic artists of this generation, in Iranian artists, obviously, in yourself, and I've noticed this in sort of in Ghazel's work, you know. So I've noticed this quite a lot, and I think it's perhaps unique to this particular generation, or I'm not quite
I don't know.
sure.
I mean, in the case of my own experience, because my parents came to France as immigrants, and they never really fought racism. They lived it, experienced it.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong, probably sometimes they fought it back, but as a whole, they were there to make money and go. So in that case, they would have accepted whatever was thrown to them because they were going to go back. So in some ways, they didn't care. For us, it's different because we're born here in France or in the UK or whatever, and we decided to make a life here, and therefore we won't accept it. And we have to voice it. And in that sense, we're very different. For our children, like you say, it's not a problem. I see my children, for them, it's not a big deal to be Algerian, Pakistan, you know, because they've got also a bit of Pakistani blood and whatever. For them, it's not a big deal. So what? What is a, because in England, it's kind of much more accepted. So that's fine. But our generation, we have to say something about it. And people would tell me, yeah, but that was a long time ago. It's changed. It's better now. I will tell them no. As long as there is injustices and prejudices, I will carry on doing the work I'm doing. And that's it.
It's also that it's you. I mean, Zineb is the hybrid Zineb. She's Algerian, she's French, she's British. I remember you wrote a text once, remember?
Yeah.
The title was Algerian, French, British, remember? African,
Muslim, Arab, Berber, I am Black, African, Berber, Arab, Muslim, a woman, British, French, Algerian, I can't remember, a whole long list. That was the title of the text. Because I am all that, And that's why it was important to highlight all that. And I did highlight all that in the film I made in Venice under the, the French pavilion, because France is that. Today, whether France wants it or not, France, it's exactly all that. I am only a small example of that diversity. Yeah,
absolutely. And on the other hand,
it's a good progress for France, I think, to have you in the pavilion. And it was a scare. I remember the 24th. I mean, I think the 23rd you received your prize.
Yeah.
Was it the 23rd? Anyway, you know how scared we all were because we were scared that Le Pen will win the elections.
Yeah.
And anyway, congratulations again for the pavilion and the special mention.
Okay. So there is one last question. Shall I answer to this one? And then we stop this. Are you considering an exhibition of the analog shots that you've referred to? Looking forward to see that. Okay. No, but I will do some film programming of some of the films, but there will be the whole films that I will show. And I've got few programs happening a bit everywhere. And perhaps we can work on something for Tehran. If somebody has a cinema and is interested in showing some films, we could do something. But anyway, the idea is to show also that this kind of political cinema and how, cinema was used as an arm to fight wars also, and I'm sure you have also in Iran a lot of filmmakers who have done films along the same line. So yes, so the idea is to do a lot of programs of those films. I cannot show the snippets of each film, you know, just in terms of right of use and showing, it's very complicated. So
Okay, so thank you, Zineb.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zineb. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to see the pavilion. I hope I can go to Venice and see it.
I hope.
And I hope we can show your work here one day.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think well done for creating this summit. I think it's amazing, and I hope it has a lot of success. And I think we have a good number of participants today. So yeah, let's hope it gets even better and stronger with the weeks to come.
Definitely, most definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for your amazing presentation. Thanks everybody to join us. I hope to see you all tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Tehran zone time. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll have
Bye.
a great day and night. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.